You're driving like you always do. Same roads, same habits, same assumptions. Nothing feels different. But what if I told you that one small mistake, something most drivers don't even realize is a violation, could quietly turn into a fine so large it affects your finances for months, even years? Not because you were reckless, not because you intended to break the law, but because the rules have changed, enforcement has tightened, and the gap between what drivers think is legal and what actually is has never been wider. So here's the question I want you to think about, and I want you to answer it in the comments. Do you believe most drivers truly understand the laws they're following every day, or are they relying on habits that might already be outdated? Because that question goes to the heart of everything we're about to discuss. Traffic law in the United States is often treated as simple. Stay within the speed limit, stop at red lights, use your signals, But legally, it is far more complex than that. It is a structured system built on statutory rules, administrative enforcement, and constitutional limits. And in 2025, that system is evolving faster than most people realize. In my legal analysis, the biggest misunderstanding is assuming traffic law is just about driving behavior. It is not. It is about legal compliance within a framework that includes state authority, federal constitutional protections, and decades of court interpretation. Let's start with the foundation. Traffic laws are created and enforced primarily at the state level. That means every state has its own specific rules, penalties, and procedures. What might be a minor infraction in one state could carry significantly higher penalties in another. This is not inconsistency. It is federalism in action. But here's where it becomes more important. Even though states control traffic laws, they must operate within the boundaries of the U.S. Constitution. That means every stop, every citation, every enforcement action must comply with constitutional protections. The Fourth Amendment is central here. It protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And legally speaking, when a police officer pulls you over, that is considered a seizure under constitutional law. Courts would likely examine whether that stop was justified at the very beginning. Was there reasonable suspicion? Was there probable cause? Even a minor violation, something as small as a broken taillight or a brief failure to signal, can legally justify a stop. That's not speculation. That's established legal doctrine based on Supreme Court precedent. In my legal analysis, this creates a situation where small mistakes can open the door to broader legal interactions. Not because the system is unfair, but because the law allows enforcement to begin at a very low threshold. Now let's add another layer. Once a stop occurs, the Fifth Amendment becomes relevant. This amendment protects against self-incrimination. During a traffic stop, you are required to provide certain information, like identification and registration. But beyond that, the situation becomes more nuanced. There is a strong constitutional argument that individuals have the right to remain silent beyond what is legally required. However, courts would likely examine how that right is exercised. Respectful, lawful conduct is essential. Misunderstanding this balance can escalate a situation unnecessarily. And this is where real-world consequences begin to take shape. Because most traffic cases don't hinge on dramatic violations. They hinge on small interactions, small decisions, small misunderstandings. Now consider how enforcement itself has changed. In 2025, technology plays a major role in traffic law. Automated cameras, digital ticketing systems, real-time license tracking, these tools have made enforcement more efficient but also more precise. In my legal analysis, that precision reduces the margin for error. There is less room for ambiguity, less room for assumptions. What used to be overlooked may now be documented and enforced consistently. Courts would likely continue to evaluate whether these technologies comply with constitutional standards, especially regarding due process. Are drivers properly notified? Do they have the opportunity to challenge citations? Are enforcement systems accurate and fair? These are active legal questions, not theoretical ones. Now let's bring this into everyday reality. Imagine receiving a citation for something you didn't even realize was a violation. Maybe it's related to lane usage. Maybe it's a new interpretation of distracted driving. Maybe it's a technical requirement that changed recently. The financial impact can be immediate. Fines, fees, insurance increases. But it doesn't stop there. Points on your license can accumulate. Too many points can lead to suspension. And in some cases, repeated violations can trigger more serious legal consequences. In my legal analysis, the true cost of traffic violations is often indirect. It's not just the ticket. It's everything that follows. Now let's talk specifically about rules that commonly create problems for drivers today. One major area is distracted driving. Laws have become stricter, and enforcement has increased. What used to be tolerated, brief phone use, minor distractions, is now often penalized. Another area is speed enforcement. Many jurisdictions have lowered thresholds for what constitutes a violation, especially in high-risk zones like school areas or construction zones. Lane discipline is another example. Improper lane changes, failure to yield, or misuse of designated lanes can result in fines that many drivers don't expect. There are also emerging rules around vehicle equipment and compliance. Lights, signals, emissions, and even registration visibility can trigger enforcement actions. Each of these may seem minor on its own, but legally, they are not minor. They are enforceable standards, backed by statute and supported by case law. Now let's address an important topic for a specific group of drivers: lawful gun owners. Transporting a firearm in a vehicle introduces additional legal responsibilities. These responsibilities vary significantly from state to state. Some states require firearms to be stored in a specific way. Some require disclosure during a traffic stop. Some impose strict limitations on where firearms can be present. There is a strong constitutional argument that the Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms. However, courts have consistently recognized that this right is subject to regulation. Courts would likely examine whether those regulations are consistent with historical traditions and public safety considerations, especially in light of recent Supreme Court decisions. In my legal analysis, lawful gun owners must be especially careful to understand both traffic laws and firearm-specific regulations. Non-compliance, even if unintentional, can lead to serious legal consequences. Now, let's step back and look at the broader picture. Why are these laws becoming stricter? Why is enforcement increasing? Supporters argue that stricter enforcement improves safety, reduces accidents, saves lives, and there is evidence to support that perspective. At the same time, critics raise concerns about over-enforcement, about minor violations leading to disproportionate consequences, about the financial burden on drivers. In my legal analysis, both perspectives have merit. The challenge is balance. Courts would likely continue to play a key role in maintaining that balance, ensuring that laws are enforced fairly, that rights are protected, and that the system remains consistent with constitutional principles. Now let's talk about political reality. Most traffic laws are not debated at the national level. They are created and modified at the state level. That means changes can happen quietly, without widespread attention. New rules can take effect without most drivers even realizing it. In my legal analysis, this creates a gap between law and awareness. And that gap is where most problems begin. Looking forward, the trend is clear. More automation, more data-driven enforcement, more emphasis on compliance. And for drivers, that means one thing: responsibility. Not just to follow the law, but to understand it. Because the law does not adjust itself to what you think it is. It operates based on what it actually is. And that difference matters. So as we come to the end of this discussion, I want to bring you back to something simple but powerful. Every time you drive, you are participating in a legal system. Every decision you make behind the wheel has a legal dimension. And the more you understand that system, the better protected you are. In my legal analysis, the safest driver is not just the most careful one, it is the most informed one. So take a moment, reflect on what you've learned, share your thoughts in the comments, respectfully, thoughtfully. Because understanding grows through discussion. And if you want more clear, professional breakdowns of laws that affect your everyday life, stay connected. Because the rules are always evolving. And the drivers who stay informed are the ones who stay ahead. Drive responsibly, stay aware, and remember, knowing the law is not optional. It is essential.